Nietzsche, why arguing is for weak people. We grow up believing that argument is a sign of strength, that debating ideas, defending opinions, and winning disputes proves intelligence and power. But Friedrich Nietzsche saw it differently. To him, argument was not strength but weakness. It was not the mark of the powerful, but of the insecure. Nietzsche believed that the strongest individuals do not waste their energy convincing others. They live their truth so completely that they do not need agreement. The weak, by contrast, argue endlessly because they need consensus to validate themselves. Arguing reveals dependence. It shows that one's convictions are fragile enough to demand recognition from others. In Nietzsche's world, the philosopher is not the one who debates, but the one who creates. The warrior of spirit is not the one who wins arguments, but the one who embodies convictions without apology. To argue is to descend into the arena of the herd. To live without argument is to rise above it. This is the harsh truth. Arguing is not power. It is confession. And those who need to argue reveal they have not yet found strength enough to stand alone. In this exploration, we'll uncover why Nietzsche believed arguing is for weak people, and why true strength lies in living without needing to persuade. We'll look at the psychology of weakness, the futility of endless disputes, and the Stoic strategies for rising above conflict. We'll also see how this philosophy transforms relationships and charisma, showing why influence without argument is the rarest and most powerful form of strength. If you've ever wondered why debates feel empty, stay with me and subscribe, because in a world full of noise, the loudest voices often prove the least strong. Nietzsche's critique of argument. For Nietzsche, argument was never the path to truth. He believed that debates, dialectics, and endless disputes were less about discovering reality and more about revealing weakness. People argue, he said, when they lack the strength to live without agreement. They argue when their convictions are too fragile to stand alone. He contrasted this with the truly powerful spirit, the one who does not waste time convincing others, but instead creates, acts, and embodies his truth. Strength does not need applause, does not seek consensus, and does not crave validation. Strength radiates from existence itself. To Nietzsche, arguing was like begging, a confession that you cannot bear your beliefs unless others carry them with you. His critique was sharpest against Socrates, whom he admired for his brilliance but despised for his reliance on dialectic. Socrates argued endlessly, questioning, refuting, persuading. Nietzsche saw this as a symptom of decline. He claimed that Socratic rationalism reflected a sick culture that no longer had instincts strong enough to live without justification. If a truth must be defended in debate, Nietzsche asked, is it really a truth, or just an opinion too weak to live in silence? Modern life only confirms his suspicion. Online debates rage endlessly, but rarely change minds. Political arguments divide families, but seldom resolve truth. Social media amplifies quarrels, each side screaming for validation while no one listens. Nietzsche would laugh bitterly at this spectacle, seeing it as proof that most people argue not because they seek truth, but because they cannot endure solitude in their convictions. The Stoics, in their way, agreed. Epictetus told his students not to waste energy debating fools. Never argue with someone whose aim is not truth but victory. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that others may oppose him, but his duty was not to convince, only to act justly. Both traditions converge on a similar point. Strength is not found in refutation, but in living so clearly that argument becomes unnecessary. For Nietzsche, arguing was never a sign of strength. It was evidence of insecurity. The strong live without needing the herd to agree. The weak spend their lives trying to drag others into their quarrels, mistaking noise for truth. The psychology of weakness. Why do people argue? Nietzsche believed it was rarely for truth. The real engine of argument, he thought, was weakness. Weakness needs recognition, cannot stand on its own. It seeks consensus, applause, and the comfort of numbers. Argument becomes the weapon of the insecure, the tool of those who cannot endure solitude in their convictions. Nietzsche's concept of ressentiment, the resentment of the powerless toward the powerful, explains much of this. When people feel small, they do not create, they quarrel. They attack, criticize, and argue because they lack the strength to build. The weak cannot rise, so they drag others down into endless disputes. Their satisfaction is not in truth, but in pulling others into the mud. Look at the modern world, and Nietzsche's diagnosis is everywhere. Online, people argue in endless threads, not to uncover reality but to signal virtue, to win applause, to silence opponents. Political debates devolve into tribal shouting matches where no one listens. Culture wars thrive because weakness craves belonging more than truth. The crowd is addicted to conflict because conflict provides identity. To argue is to feel alive when one cannot create. The Stoics warned against this long before Nietzsche. Epictetus said that if someone insults you, the wise response is not to argue, but to ask, "Is it true? If it is, change yourself. If it is not, ignore it." To waste energy in dispute is to reveal dependence on the other person's opinion. Marcus Aurelius wrote that truth is not harmed by mockery and does not need defense. It simply is. Relationships reveal this weakness most clearly. Couples who cannot resolve insecurity often argue endlessly, not to understand, but to dominate. Friends quarrel to prove superiority rather than to seek clarity. Charisma built on debate often hides fragility. It shouts loudly because silence would expose emptiness. For Nietzsche, this was the psychology of weakness. Argument as performance, resentment disguised as morality, conflict in place of creation. The weak argue because they cannot live without agreement. The strong create, endure, and rise above. To him, the measure of a person's strength was not how well they argued, but how well they could live without needing to. Power beyond persuasion for Nietzsche, the highest form of strength was not found in winning arguments but in transcending the need for them. True power was expressed not in persuasion, but in creation. The will to power, the driving force of life itself, was not about proving a point. It was about shaping the world in one's own image, living with such conviction that existence itself became the argument. Persuasion, Nietzsche argued, is the weapon of those who lack the strength to act. They rely on words because they cannot embody their vision. They seek consensus because they cannot stand alone. But the strong individual, the higher type, does not waste energy convincing others. He lives his truth so vividly that agreement becomes irrelevant. The world may mock or resist him, but his very life testifies to his power. Think of the figures Nietzsche admired. Artists, poets, leaders who did not argue with the crowd but created something beyond its comprehension. The crowd debates, the creator builds. The weak quarrel, the strong transform. This, to Nietzsche, was the difference between arguing and creating.
Argument druins, crisischen keinkurs.
The Stoics offered a striking parallel. Marcus Aurelius never sought to persuade the mob. His reflections were written in private, for himself, as reminders to live with integrity. Epictetus warned that to argue with fools was to become like them. Instead, he urged his students to live in such a way that their actions spoke louder than words. True power, both Nietzsche and the Stoics agreed, comes from embodiment, not persuasion. In relationships, this lesson is profound. A person who constantly argues with their partner reveals insecurity, a need to dominate rather than to love. But one who lives with quiet integrity, whose actions prove their devotion, inspires trust without words. Charisma works the same way. The manipulative speaker dazzles with rhetoric but fades quickly when deeds do not match. The truly magnetic individual influences without trying, because their independence radiates strength. Nietzsche's challenge is clear. Do not waste your life persuading those who will never see. Create instead. Live in such a way that your existence itself is proof of your truth. For persuasion binds you to others, but creation liberates you from them. And the one who creates, Nietzsche believed, will always stand above the one who argues. Why arguing drains the spirit? Nietzsche believed that argument does not just reveal weakness, it consumes strength. To argue endlessly is to squander energy that could be spent creating, becoming, or transcending. Debate traps the mind in the world of others, forcing it to respond, react, and justify instead of forging its own path. In this sense, argument is not only futile, it is corrosive. Nietzsche admired Socrates, but he also saw him as a cautionary figure. Socrates spent his life in argument, interrogating and refuting, exposing contradictions in others' beliefs. But Nietzsche saw in this brilliance a sickness. For him, Socrates represented a culture that had grown too rational, too defensive, too dependent on words instead of instincts. Argument, in this sense, was a sign of decline, a symptom of life turned against itself. The more one argues, Nietzsche thought, the less one lives. This insight resonates today. Social media thrives on argument, fueling outrage that never resolves. Comment sections, debates, and endless quarrels drain energy without producing truth. Minds are consumed not with living but with reacting, caught in cycles of resentment. Argument becomes an addiction, providing the illusion of significance while hollowing out the spirit. The Stoics warned of the same danger. Epictetus taught that inner peace is worth more than victory in debate. To argue with fools, he said, is to become one. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself not to waste breath on those unwilling to listen. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. Action is greater than quarrel. Embodiment greater than dispute. In relationships, argument drains intimacy. Couples who fight endlessly often mistake conflict for communication. But the truth is simpler. The more they argue, the less they love. Real strength in love is not in winning disputes but in refusing to descend into them, choosing clarity, patience, and integrity over endless battles. In charisma, the same principle holds. A leader who argues reveals fragility. A leader who embodies conviction inspires without a word. Nietzsche's harshest point is this: every argument drags us downward. It ties us to the herd, saps our energy, and weakens our spirit. The strong know this, and they refuse to waste themselves in the noise. They rise above quarrels not because they cannot argue, but because their life is already proof of what they believe. Living without argument for Nietzsche, the alternative to argument was not silence born of weakness, but silence born of strength. To live without argument was to live in such a way that persuasion became unnecessary. Truth, when embodied, does not need defending. Power, when real, does not need proving. The strongest individuals do not convince, they radiate. Living without argument means grounding life in action rather than reaction. Nietzsche urged the higher type to create values instead of debating them. Do not waste breath proving what you believe, become it. Do not seek agreement from the crowd, stand apart from it. The herd may chatter, quarrel, and demand justification, but the one who is strong does not stoop to their arena. He builds his own, and in doing so shows them what strength looks like. The Stoics expressed this in their own discipline. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." Epictetus told his students that their lives should be their philosophy, not their words. To embody virtue, he believed, was a greater refutation than any debate could ever provide. In relationships, this principle transforms conflict. The weak argue to dominate or to demand reassurance. The strong choose clarity and integrity, refusing to be dragged into endless quarrels. Love rooted in virtue does not need constant defense. It proves itself through patience, honesty, and action. In charisma, the same truth applies. The performer argues for attention. The authentic individual draws attention simply by being. Living without argument also requires discipline. It demands the courage to endure misunderstanding, the patience to walk alone, the confidence to let others think what they will. To refuse argument is to accept that not everyone will agree, admire, or understand. But Nietzsche believed this was the true test of strength: to carry one's truth without needing the world to echo it back. In the end, to live without argument is to embody freedom. It is to rise above the noise, to conserve energy for creation, and to live with such clarity that your existence itself becomes the only argument necessary. The weak quarrel endlessly, mistaking noise for strength. The strong live so completely that they silence debate without a word.